I mean, I've always looked to the natural world to find a sense of growing rhythm, because that's where my real spiritual connectivity lies. Like, whenever I feel a little bit out of step, if I can go for a walk and tune into the world around me, whether I'm just listening to the sounds around me or feeling my feet on the earth, it immediately puts me in a place of reverence and gratitude and that perfect small feeling.
I've been fortunate enough to be on a few of those walks. Over the last 9 years of my friendship with Maggie Rogers, I've watched her release 3 critically acclaimed albums and play sold-out shows at some of the biggest arenas in the world. In between these moments, we've still managed to create time to ground ourselves in nature. As much as I like to tease Maggie about not being able to sit still, time and time again, we've learned that in order to create, we need moments of pause. Like the earth, there's a time to rest and be fallow, and a time for growth and harvest. In fact, it was right after we took a hiking trip to the mountains of Patagonia that she came back and recorded her most recent album, Don't Forget Me. I'm Willow Defebaugh, and this is The Nature Of. Each week, we'll look to the natural world for insights into how to navigate the experience of being human. This week, Maggie and I are exploring the nature of creativity. Let's listen as she shares about the cyclical nature of her art, the creative practice she's honed over her career, and the surprising animal she's found to be a source of inspiration. Okay.
All right.
Maggie.
Sup?
We have been friends for 9 years, and we are finally sitting down. I'm so excited to dive into nature and creativity and sound. It is my utmost belief that every human being is creative. We are all part of Mother Nature. She is the great creator, the great creatrix. But you are an artist. You've taken that creative seed and you have grown it into not just a beautiful career, but an incredibly successful one. Tell me where you're at right now. You just put out a critically acclaimed album last year, Don't Forget Me. You embarked on the biggest tour of your career, casually playing 2 sold-out shows at Maggie Square Garden. Where are you right now? How are you feeling?
I'm kind of in the open space, which is a place that I haven't been ever. I haven't really done this since COVID, and that really doesn't feel like it counts because somebody forced it.
You.
Somebody made me. No, I haven't felt like this much of a new beginning or this much possibility since I was like 18. I really feel like playing the last shows for Don't Forget Me and completing that record cycle, it felt like the end of this bigger circle or cycle, like that was the first 3 albums. I mean, between that, I was sort of touring and making art consistently for about 8 or 9 years. And it was an amazing feeling to be at the end of that tour, looking out into this beautiful sea of people from the stage, and somehow it felt like the end of the beginning. And to be at this place that, you know, like you said, being like 2 nights at Madison Square Garden, which I can see out the window as we're taping, which is so special, and have that feel like the beginning is so special. Like, I feel like I just graduated into middle school or high school. Like, I feel like, but there's also a lot of open space. Like, I've never done life before. It's this really open adventure, and I've either been on tour or been in school, which to me, like, structure isn't a really important part of my life. So being in this structureless time, I think it's testing my artist brain, because I'm having to really trust myself and my intuition about how to spend my time and how to artistically feed myself and how to give myself space to recharge and refill. It's a new adventure. You know, I'm not super good at sitting still.
You? Really?
But I'm finding my way.
Yeah.
This year I'm trying to spend 2 weeks. I move almost constantly. Willow knows this. But I'll like be in a place for a little while and be like, oh, but what if I went here for the weekend? And like movement and travel always feeds me, but I'm trying to spend at least 2 weeks in a place.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this cycle. It's always like towards the end of the tour, you're like, I gotta get home.
Like
and
no
then,
one needs to talk to me.
2 days into being home, you're like,
I literally call you on from my couch, being like, so what now?
And I cherish that phone call. But I want to stick with that thread a little bit of like what you're learning in this kind of period of like quote unquote downtime for you, which is so new for you, because conversation you and I have had a few times over the years is the cadence of creativity and how much is expected of artists to constantly put out new material. And I think a lot about it in terms of the earth, right? Like in the realm of agriculture, you need periods of time where the earth can be fallow, where you let the earth just regenerate. And that's critical for soil health. It's actually critical for productivity, for being able to grow things over time. You need those periods of rest. And just curious how that has kind of evolved for you in your thinking, and particularly right now when you're in this like little bit of a fallow moment.
I'm certainly in the fallow period, and I think that negative space or that absence, that quiet time, it's one of the most important parts of the creative cycle or the creative wheel. The fallow period, I think, tests my idea of my identity as an artist because it requires me to be more than I'm doing something. So it's this sort of different form of listening where I'm having to really nurture a relationship with, you know, where does creativity come from and how do I serve a relationship to that sort of source and honor my own exhaustion, which, you know, in music or in sound, when you're creating, like with technology, you're always thinking about the input-output structure. Like in a real physical, logistical format, when I'm looking at a console or trying to create sound, or even this microphone, there's an input and an output structure of how sound is being captured and recorded. And I think so much about the input and the output within my own body, or within my creative being. And I think the biggest thing I've tried to do over the last 4 years specifically is create a sustainable practice around my input and my output, because there's a never-ending call for output, but there needs to be an equal and opposite reaction in order to keep your body or yourself balanced. And everyone's balance looks really different, but I think in this fallow period, it's interesting, right? Because if you were to look at the soil, it looks barren. But there's so much happening underneath the surface. And I could sit here and be like, I'm swimming out into this abyss, and it's this new beginning, and there's nothing going on, and I have all this empty space. But the reality is, which you know, I have like 13, 14 songs for a record done. I've got like 200 pages written for this book that I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years. So it's not like there's nothing going on.
This is your idea of being fallow.
This is my quiet time. I'm not actively in the studio, or I'm not actively on stage. And even in my writing practice, I haven't really grounded into a flow yet because I don't want to. And I think the biggest thing is trusting what I want to do and trusting what I'm being pulled towards, and just having the self-knowledge to be like, when I want to write, I will write. Why? Because I love doing it. But nothing makes me hate the thing I love more than being forced to do it. And that's how you know I'm a Taurus.
Another thing we bond over. You know, I want to go back to something you said too about identity, which is, I think in this culture that we live in, it's like if you are not actively creating in this moment, if you are not writing in this moment, if you are not recording in this moment, then it's like your
and you don't
identity is
exist.
stripped. You don't exist.
This is something I'm struggling with a little bit right now, because I think I've been trying to really integrate my extroverted life with my introverted life, and to walk through the world with the knowledge of the creative power that I know that I have. And I think in between records in the past, I've had a tendency to like hide or go into real hibernation or cocoon, cut all my hair off and move to Boston.
Oh, I remember.
Which slapped, by the way. That was awesome.
It was a great time.
But I'm trying to have a bit more fluidity. Yeah. Or I think it's just, the older I get, or the more interest I have in sustainability, the poles, like the extremes, are coming way closer together. And there's just a fluid practice happening. But it's definitely a process, and it feels, I have to say, it feels a little bit like a free fall right now. And I have to keep it's a practice of being present. Like, I have to keep reminding myself that I'm not on a timeline. Like, I keep being like, oh yeah, but 2027. Or even people, I'm like, I'm not touring for at least 18 months. And it's like, well, that's true. It could be 3 years till I'm back on stage. It also, like, someone could call me next week and be like, but this thing. And I'd be like, hell yeah, let's go. So I don't know. I'm somebody who likes to know the answer. And that is really being tested right now.
Well, and threading some of these pieces together here, I mean, in talking about how there isn't a playbook for artists, mm-hmm. right? I love how in some ways in this conversation, what you're pointing towards is like, well, what does nature have to say? Like, what is nature's playbook for creating, right? And that's the fallow period.
Yeah.
And something, that's come up a few times already here and that we talk a lot about is cycles.
Yeah. Because
nature creates in cycles always, whereas we're existing in this very manufactured culture of like linear creation, right? It's almost like an assembly line. Mm-hmm. It's so linear.
I mean, I've always looked to the natural world to find a sense of growing rhythm, because that's where my real spiritual connectivity lies. Like, whenever I feel a little bit out of step, if I can go for a walk and tune into the world around me, whether I'm just listening to the sounds around me or feeling my feet on the earth, it immediately puts me in a place of reverence and gratitude and that perfect small feeling. I think time is an incredibly important part of the creative process, like especially with sound, like listening back to something after time has passed, like 2 or 3 months later, changes the way something sounds or lands for you. You're just going to be able to hear it differently. In the same way that like heart rate can change how you hear something, because your own internal rhythm affects the way that you perceive tempo. So if you're nervous when you're listening to something, it's going to sound faster. Or like,
wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, I would be listening to something, I'd be like really nervous, and I'd be like, oh, it's too slow. Because my internal rhythm was so fast that I wasn't appropriately perceiving it. Whereas if I listen to something and I'm really calm, it's up here. Like, it's lifting me up. It's the effect that it's having on my body. Like, it's so deeply somatic, that process.
Brains just love to get in the way,
oh,
don't they?
God.
It's like we need them.
Mine's going to tie itself in a knot as soon as it can. So I'm just trying to give it a little puzzle. If it keeps its hands busy with a puzzle, then it'll be happy. But
yeah, it's about how do we engage it, but not too much.
Mm-hmm.
You said, you referenced how spending time in nature is always something that stills you, it grounds you, and that's an important part of the creative process. I have this moment I often think back on when you and I were traveling in Patagonia, and we got to our destination after a whole day of traveling. And we sat by the water. Do you remember this? And the wind was blowing on the water, and it was going in these like circular patterns. And it just felt like this language.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you've arrived. Sit, listen. And I really appreciate that that's something you and I share, is the value of that time, just listening to nature. I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit more to that and how you create time for that intentionally in your life and the role that nature plays specifically in influencing your music.
Well, I think that creating or we're talking about input-output structures.
Yeah.
Singing is the most important like tool that I have, that I think anyone has. It's such an ancient tool, and when you sing, to me it's like resonant therapy. Like my whole body is vibrating, and it's like whatever needs to be released or comes out just comes through. But in order to sing, what you really need to do is listen. Like singing is really about a practice of listening, because you're listening to the sound coming out of your mouth and matching it to what's in your head. And many times, if you're in collaboration with other people, like when I'm singing on stage and I'm singing harmony with a band, like I'm guesting, I have almost none of my voice in my monitor. I need to hear everybody else. And I need to hear them way louder than me, because I'll know what to do if I can hear everybody else. That practice also exists in my life and relationship to nature or to the natural world, which is that without that pause or without that moment to listen, it's really easy for the orchestra of everything else going on in my life to be really loud. And those moments that ask me to stop and listen, I come into a place of presence. And that to me is kind of what it's all about. It's what the beauty of being on stage is. Because when I'm on stage, I'm so present because I'm listening. And I'm listening not only to the music, but I'm listening to my environment. I'm listening to the crowd. I'm trying to sense into what they need or what they want or how I might be of service. And I think that like multifaceted process, it works on both an individual level and it works on a collective level, because I think, you and I both know that there's just nothing in the world that feels better than screaming the lyrics to your favorite song in a room full of people who also love it and see you and know you by knowing that you too love this song. And to me, the stories, that is like music or art or sound in its final form. There's the resting period and then there's the creating period. But when the art is given to an audience and then is held, the collected stories that art begins to hold and weave together in the combined amount of time of just the art existing out in the world and becoming a part of other people's lives. I mean, that to me is the greatest privilege and pleasure of what I get to do.
Music is not, or sound is something that is so not just anthropocentric. It's not just our species, right?
Yeah.
It's like this universal aspect of the natural world in some ways. And I want to invite you.
I know what's happening.
You know what's about to happen. I want to invite you to share a little anecdote about a particular animal that you've been inspired by.
Willow. Well, I love geese.
Why do you love geese, Maggie?
I love geese. Well, I grew up on the eastern shore of Maryland, in this really tiny town where every year there's this thing called the Waterfowl Festival, which literally celebrates geese.
It's so niche.
It's so niche and it's so awesome. And there's like cream of crab soup and Labrador retrievers, and it's
your dream.
It's awesome. Geese really symbolize home to me, and obviously there's the Mary Oliver of it all. But what I love about this is so funny. What I love about geese. Okay, so basically last year I was with a group of friends in Cambridge, right as the year turned, and we were talking about our word of the year. And it got to me, this was for 2024. I hadn't thought about it at all, and my like brilliant, sensitive, wonderful friends were just like dropping knowledge. Like they were just like throwing out these words that were so like creative and intentional and cool. And it got to me and I panicked and I went, goose. And everyone was like, goose? And You know, if there's one thing I know that I can do is that I'm a storyteller, aka I can bullshit better than anyone you know. So I was like, yeah, goose. Well, geese they remind me of home. But also what I love about geese,
here it is, drum roll,
is they sing for the love of singing. Mm-hmm. They make sound to let each other know where they are, but also they're just going about their day, flapping on their way to Canada, just honking because it sounds nice. And they work as a team, and everything they do together, and they are sustainable in the way that they take turns and who's the leader, because the leader carries an enormous amount of weight or force of the wind, and also being a silly goose is an important part of my life.
It's a hugely important part of your life. Love it. Okay, so essentially researchers are increasingly planting mics in different ecosystems to listen to the sounds that animals are creating as a way to measure the health of an ecosystem. It's a new conservation tool, essentially based on the hypothesis that you can measure the health of an ecosystem by the music it creates.
It's amazing.
And I'm thinking about that in relationship to culture, to our human ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, I think so many people aren't given the rest space needed to be creative, because everybody is creative. But if everybody worked together to have a sustainable environment, then everyone would be an artist. I think environments or cultures where art flourishes are... People say that art isn't necessary to live, right? Like, you need food, water, shelter. But it's emotional care. Like, when I am like singing for the joy of singing, it means that my soul is alive and that my mind is full. And I really think that the key for me to everything is allowing my mind, body, and my spirit to be in a relational form. And making art to me is such spiritual care. So it makes sense to me that the symphony of an environment denotes the health, because when I'm not feeling very good, I don't really want to sing. It's usually the thing I need the most, though.
It's almost, I mean, food, water, shelter, that's survival. But art is living.
That's not life, yeah. So to hear that information about bioacoustics, it makes absolute, complete sense to me.
And, you know, one of the other applications that fits so well with that, one of the other applications of bioacoustics is not just measuring the health of an ecosystem, but also restoring it. So there was one study that was published in Nature Communications, and they found that when they played the sounds of a healthy coral reef, like on a speaker underwater on a dead coral reef,
whoa,
all of these fish started to flock to it. And you need to have a diverse, thriving fish population in order for there to be a healthy coral reef. So coupled with habitat reconstruction, they believe that this could actually be a way of restoring coral reefs through sound. So, and I love that because it fits with what you're talking about here of just the healing power of sound, which I feel like is something that's been a big part of your journey.
I mean, it's the most important part of my life. And I can tell when I haven't made sound in enough time. Like, I start to get kind of cagey, or I feel like stopped up, or that feeling like when you need to cry. Like, I need to like let the drain out. Like, there is something about creating sound. I mean, I think that this is one of the reasons it's the hardest to get off of tour. I mean, there's a million reasons. Like, adrenaline is awesome, and your sense of purpose is incredibly clear, and you get to live in this really intentional community on buses, and it's awesome. I didn't always love it, but I now love it so much. And but the other thing is that I'm making sound for a minimum of 3 hours every day. 2 hours during the show and an hour during sound check. But often I'm rehearsing backstage, or I'm working on a cover, or I'm just playing with my bandmates. And I think that's really hard to just achieve in my like normal day. because I maybe just won't give myself the time. Even though I am an artist in both profession and vocation, I won't just let myself sit in my living room and play piano for 3 hours. And I don't know why, but I think it has to do with, you know, there's a reason it's called playing music. Like the act of play and the childlike exploration and intuition of that is so important.
Well, and I love that you share that, because I think anyone who's listening who is creative or who has any kind of creative practice, like, we do have these images in our mind of what we think artists do, right? It's like that you're sitting under the tree, or you're, you know, of what presence looks like. And I think in both of our journeys, in a lot of ways, spiritually speaking, our idea of presence has shifted a lot over the years. And I know for me, I thought being present was meditating under the tree all the time. And so much of what I've learned is, for me, spirituality is more about living. And sometimes that living is listening to, you know, sometimes for us, the right thing is to go and drink the martinis.
I was sort of like,
and other times it's for us to go sit under the tree.
It is spiritually as important that I am like drinking water, going swimming or running or going to yoga, like reading something that like conjures the goddess for me, all of that. Incredibly spiritually important. It's also spiritually important that I like eat barbecue chips and watch One Tree Hill in my pajamas or in my like full underwear. And like that to me is the joy of life. And right now I'm just going to the movies a lot. And I've been like, I'm kind of like chilling. But then the other day I was journaling and I was realizing that I had seen 3 different movies that had a scene where something from the ceiling shifts and then light comes through the window. And, you know, I'm starting to pick up on patterns. I'm feeding myself imagery. And it might not be completely evident to me, the like creative spiritual value of something in the moment. But I will know, this is why time is such an important ingredient to creative practice, is like in 2 weeks when I sit down to work on a song or work on a passage, this image is going to come through.
It's time and presence and the listening that comes with the presence. I know that if I'm just like running around, I'm like, I have to write, I have to do this, it's always going to be so hard. But if I can like take the moment to go for the walk, and then all of a sudden I see something and that sparks, that's one thread, right? And then you see something else that's a thread. And I like what you said about noticing patterns. Like that is how can you weave without that?
I mean, you know? humans notice patterns, but I think it's also the creative practice. I think it's important to note that it can feel incredibly selfish or narcissistic. Like I felt this way particularly in the pandemic, when I was like, who am I to just spend all day writing about what I feel when there is this much suffering happening in the world? And there's like that version of it, and then there's the other version of it, which is like, I need to be writing every day. And like, why am I not writing? And my instinct to be like, I should just do what I want. But doing what I want is like, is that not selfish? Like, the reality to both of them is that like, I think that if you can really be vulnerable, then you can touch the core of what it means to have an experience that is human, that everybody shares. And I think some of the greatest art, like my rule always when I'm making art, is to try and show, not tell. And like living a life of vulnerability rather than saying like, I'm vulnerable. Like it's so inspiring to... And it's so contagious. Like, that's why I'm always, like, dancing full out on stage, because I know that me in my fullness can inspire somebody else to be in theirs, because that's how or at least that's how I have felt at concerts. When I'm watching a performer fully in their body, it puts me in my body. And in terms of, like, the daily practice stuff, like, I've spent so many times beating myself up for not writing, only to sit down and suddenly write 10,000 words because I wanted to. And I think a big thing I'm trying to think about this year is, and this was an invitation from a friend as well, is just not picking the fruit before it's ripe. When it's time to write, no one can stop me. Like, I am at the piano or I am at the page and it comes through. But like, part of sustainable practice is also like using your time well. Like, I could beat my head against the piano for 10 hours to maybe write the song, or I could wait until the song is ready and it'll probably come through in 10 minutes and be really fun. Like, letting it be easy.
Letting it be easy. What other tips do you have for anyone listening who might be looking for ways to channel their creativity?
Don't write every day because somebody told you to. Write when you want to. Or write when you feel inspired. Like, I journal almost every day. I do it before bed. I haven't journaled in like 4 or 5 days. It's okay. Being kind to yourself. Big creative tip. And I think just trusting that you're an artist. I think I've been really thinking recently about what it means to be an artist, because I think that there are musicians and there are artists, and there are painters and then there's artists. And if you're an artist, it sort of transcends all mediums. And I think anyone can be an artist, but I think it's really about embracing your inner freak. Like, I am really realizing in this moment when I'm trying to like assimilate into normal life, I'm super weird. And like, duh, but I'm getting really acquainted with my own like strangeness and the really weirdness of my brain. And it's funny that I ever tried to like be normal, because I'm so clearly not, but I feel really normal. Like, my reality is really grounded to me. But I think advice would be like, just embrace your freak as fast as possible, because authenticity is the only key to making true art. And until you can love yourself, you can't love your art.
Until you love yourself, you can't love your art. You know, I always think about nature in regards to authenticity, because you look at an ecosystem, you look at everything blooming, everything humming, everything thriving, and there's just no question about it being itself, right?
And like, it's full freak.
Yeah.
Like,
everything in nature is a freak.
So weird.
I love watching nature documentaries because I'm like, look at that freaky praying mantis.
And like, that's how you do that? Like,
everything's alien. Okay, I do have one thing I want to circle back to.
Yeah.
Something you said, the asking yourself, like, who am I to create in this moment when there's so much suffering?
Yeah.
I think that is a huge thing that holds people back. Like, we're living in this era of polycrisis, right? Climate crisis. We're seeing horrific things on our screens. And I think that a lot of people feel this feeling of like,
who am I to spend the afternoon painting?
Yeah.
Like, singing for the joy of singing.
What is this poem going to do? Or what? How do you overcome that and create even amidst?
I think that the reassertion of your own humanity has the power to assert and empower the humanity of others. And I think that giving voice to feeling validates the feelings of others. As long as it's done with intention and respect. Like, I always feel like art is a form of caring. And it's the thing that I think about the most when I'm on stage and off. And how else will we nurture each other but in living color?
That is a perfect note to end on. Earlier, when Maggie was waxing poetic about geese, she mentioned a certain beloved poem by Mary Oliver. The themes in that poem happened to be pretty relevant to the conversation that we were just having. Here's Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body
love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. At the end of each episode, I offer 3 prompts for guided self-reflection to help internalize and investigate how this week's themes show up in our daily lives and how we can apply the principles discussed. For this week, our questions are: what part of my creative cycle am I in right now? How can I create more moments of pause to better serve my creativity? What would it look like for me to spend more time in nature for inspiration?